Every animal on Earth eats raw food. Every animal, with one exception. Human beings are the only species that systematically cooks what it eats. Not occasionally, not in some populations, not as a cultural variant that exists alongside raw food consumption. Every human culture ever documented in every part of the world, at every period of history for which we have evidence, cooks food. Cooking is not a cultural invention that some groups have and others lack. It is a human universal as language, as universal as the incest taboo, as universal as music. And the question of why this is true, of where cooking came from and what it did to the species that discovered it, turns out to be one of the most important questions in human evolutionary biology. Because the answer is not simply that cooking made food taste better, or that it made food safer, or that it made food last longer, though it did all of those things. The answer is that cooking changed what human beings are. It changed our anatomy, our physiology, our social organization, the size and structure of our brains, and the nature of our relationships with each other. The scientist who has done more than anyone else to work out the implications of cooking for human evolution is Richard Wrangham, a primatologist and biological anthropologist at Harvard University. In his 2009 book, Catching Fire: How Cooking Made Us Human, Wrangham laid out what he calls the cooking hypothesis, and it is one of the most radical and most important ideas in the science of human origins. The cooking hypothesis begins with a deceptively simple observation. When you cook food, you unlock calories that would otherwise be unavailable to the body. Raw starch is difficult for the human digestive system to process. A significant proportion of the calories in raw starchy foods like tubers and grains pass through the body without being absorbed. But when you cook starch, the structure of the starch granules changes. They become far more accessible to digestive enzymes. The caloric yield of cooked starch can be dramatically higher than the caloric yield of the same food eaten raw. The same principle applies to protein. Raw protein requires substantial digestive work. The human stomach and intestines must spend considerable energy breaking down raw meat or raw eggs into the amino acids the body can use. Cooking denatures the proteins before they enter the digestive system, making them far more accessible. Studies comparing the caloric yield of raw versus cooked meat have found that cooking can increase the energy the body extracts from the same piece of meat by as much as 30%. Wrangham's key insight was that this caloric difference had profound consequences for human anatomy over evolutionary time. If cooked food provides substantially more energy per bite than raw food, then a species that switches to cooked food does not need to spend as much of its biological budget on the digestive system. And this is precisely what the fossil record shows happened in the lineage leading to modern humans. The great apes, our closest living relatives, have large digestive systems relative to their body size. Chimpanzees have long intestines, large colons, and large stomachs, all adaptations for processing raw plant material that requires extensive digestion. The hominins of 2 to 3 million years ago, the australopithecines, had similar digestive proportions. But beginning roughly 1.8 million years ago, with the emergence of Homo erectus, the hominin gut began to shrink dramatically. The colon shortened, the stomach reduced in size. The rib cage, which in apes flares outward to accommodate the large digestive organs below, became narrower and more barrel-shaped. This was not a random change. It was an adaptation. And Wrangham's argument is that the only plausible explanation for it is the adoption of cooking. A species cannot afford to have a smaller digestive system unless it is getting more caloric value from each unit of food it eats. The shrinking gut of early Homo is the anatomical signature of a species that had discovered how to pre-digest its food before eating it. But the implications go much further than gut size. The calories freed up by the reduction of the digestive system had to go somewhere, and the fossil record suggests strongly where they went. The human brain is an extraordinarily expensive organ. It constitutes roughly 2% of body weight in modern humans, but it consumes approximately 20% of the body's caloric budget at rest. No other organ comes close to this ratio of mass to energy expenditure. The brain is so metabolically expensive that it imposes a severe constraint on evolution. You cannot evolve a larger brain unless you can also supply the additional calories it requires. The brains of hominins began to expand dramatically at roughly the same time the gut began to shrink. Australopithecines had brain volumes of roughly 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, comparable to modern chimpanzees. Homo erectus had brain volumes of 800 to 1100 cubic centimeters. Modern Homo sapiens average around 1350 cubic centimeters. This roughly threefold expansion in brain volume over 2 million years is one of the most rapid evolutionary changes in the history of complex life. And it correlates with the reduction in gut size in a way that suggests a direct energetic trade-off. Wrangham's argument is that cooking was the key to this trade-off. By providing more calories per bite and by reducing the energetic cost of digestion, cooking freed up the metabolic resources that allowed the hominin brain to expand. Without cooking, the caloric math does not work. A modern human attempting to subsist on the raw diet of a chimpanzee would spend so much of its time chewing and digesting that it could not sustain brain activity at the level modern humans require. Primatologists have estimated that chimpanzees spend approximately 6 hours per day chewing their food. Modern humans spend roughly 1 hour. The time freed by cooking is not simply a convenience. It is time that became available for social interaction, for tool-making, for the kinds of extended cultural learning and transmission that define human existence. The physical consequences of cooking extend beyond the gut. The human face is dramatically different from the face of our closest living relatives. We have smaller teeth, weaker jaws, less prominent facial musculature, and a different jaw geometry than chimpanzees or australopithecines. These are not simply differences in appearance, they are differences in the machinery of chewing. Human jaws and teeth are adapted for food that has already been softened by cooking. We are not well designed for chewing raw meat or raw hard plant material. We are designed for cooked food. The anthropologist Charles Loring Brace documented the progressive reduction in human tooth size over the course of hominin evolution, and argued that this reduction was driven by the progressive softening of food through cooking and food preparation. The fossil record shows human teeth getting progressively smaller over time in a way that tracks the increasing sophistication of food processing techniques. Smaller teeth are not simply a loss of capability, they are an adaptation to a food source that no longer requires large, powerful teeth to process. The cooking hypothesis also illuminates something important about the social organization of early humans. Cooking requires fire, and maintaining fire, gathering fuel, preparing food, and protecting the site where food is being cooked creates a new kind of social structure, the hearth. The anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss argued in his structuralist analysis of myth that the distinction between raw and cooked is one of the most fundamental distinctions in human culture, a distinction that encodes something essential about the relationship between nature and culture. Lévi-Strauss was making a primarily cultural argument, but Wrangham's work suggests that the distinction maps onto something real about human evolutionary history. The hearth was not just a cooking site, it was the original social hub around which early human groups organized. Cooking at a fixed location creates what the anthropologist might call a center of gravity for the social group. It creates a reason to return to a specific place, a reason to share food rather than consume it immediately upon finding it, and a reason to coordinate the activities of group members in time. You must have wood gathered before you start cooking. You must have food brought back to the cooking site. You must have someone tending the fire while others are gathering. This coordination requirement is, Wrangham and others have argued, one of the forces that drove the evolution of pair bonding in humans. In most primate species, males and females do not form long-term exclusive mating partnerships. Chimpanzees are promiscuous, but human beings, across virtually all cultures, form some version of pair bonds, relationships in which a male and a female are socially recognized as a unit and maintain some degree of mutual investment in each other and in their offspring. Wrangham proposes that cooking created the conditions for pair bonding through a specific mechanism. If females are cooking food at a fixed location, the cooked food represents a concentrated, valuable resource that is vulnerable to theft by other males. A male who forms a pair bond with a female and protects her cooking site from theft is trading protection for a reliable supply of high-quality cooked food. The female benefits from having her food supply protected. The male benefits from having a reliable supply of high-calorie cooked food and from the reproductive access that the pair bond provides. This is a controversial proposal, and not all anthropologists accept the details of Wrangham's account of pair bonding. But the broader point stands. Cooking reorganized human social life in ways that went far beyond simply changing what people ate. It created a new ecology of cooperation, coordination, and mutual dependence that has no parallel in the primate world. The evolutionary implications of cooking also extend to the question of food sharing. Raw food, in most primate species, is consumed by the individual who found it. Chimpanzees sometimes share meat from cooperative hunts, but sharing is the exception rather than the rule. Cooked food, because it requires time, preparation, and a fixed location, is much more naturally shared. You do not cook a meal for yourself alone and then immediately leave. You cook and then eat at the cooking site, with the people who are present. The anthropologist Michael Gurven has documented the centrality of food sharing in hunter-gatherer societies, and the patterns he has found suggest that food sharing is not simply generosity. It is a form of economic exchange that creates ongoing relationships of mutual obligation and support. The campfire is not just a cooking site. It is the original marketplace, the original place where resources are exchanged and social bonds are created and maintained. The implications of the cooking hypothesis extend into the deep structure of human social life in ways that are still being worked out. If Wrangham is right that cooking was the key innovation that allowed the hominin brain to expand, then cooking is not simply a cultural achievement. It is the condition of possibility for human culture itself. Language, music, art, religion, science, all of the things that make human beings the kind of creatures they are, become possible only because of the metabolic surplus that cooking created. And there is something deeply interesting about the fact that the most universal human activity, the one thing that every culture on Earth does and has always done, is the activity that created the conditions for human culture in the first place. You are, in a very literal biological sense, a cooked animal. Your brain is the size it is because your ancestors discovered fire and learned to use it to pre-digest their food. Your teeth are the size they are because your lineage has been eating cooked food for so long that the original chewing machinery has been reduced to the minimum necessary. Your gut is the size it is because the metabolic surplus created by cooking allowed the energetically expensive digestive system of your ape ancestors to shrink. Your social life is organized the way it is because the hearth created a social structure that required cooperation, coordination, and mutual investment in ways that raw food-eating primates never needed. Every meal you cook is an act that echoes back nearly 2 million years. And every time you gather around a table to eat with other people, you are doing something that your ancestors were doing before they were fully human. The hearth came first, and everything else followed.